on camera.
Today is February 15th, 2024, and my name is Chad Wright. I'm a volunteer at Buckhead Heritage, and with me is Laura Dotson and Judith Vandiver, volunteers at Buckhead Heritage, and Sue Verhoff, Director of Oral History and Genealogy at the Atlanta History Center. We're here today to record an oral history with Mr. Ivan Allen IV, who is a native Atlantan and lifelong Buckhead resident. Mr. Allen's oral history is being recorded for the Buckhead Heritage Oral History Project in partnership with the Atlanta History Center. We're honored to have you with us, Mr. Allen, and thank you for participating in the project.
Thank you for inviting me, Chad.
You're welcome. Where did you grow up, Ivan?
I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and my childhood home was on Northside Drive between Valley and Blackland.
What's your first memory of Buckhead?
I remember as a young boy, I would get dropped off at the Sears Shopping Center, which is now where Buckhead Plaza 1 and Buckhead Plaza 2 is. And I loved to go into the sporting goods store on the back side of the Sears department store. It was also the location that I would catch the bus. The Oglethorpe 23 bus would take me out to the corner of Peachtree and Ashford Dunwoody. I was allowed to ride the bus as a young child.
And how old was that to be allowed to ride the bus?
I'm guessing 11 years old, 12 years old.
And what would you do out on the North Line to Oglethorpe?
The bus would turn around at Ashford Dunwoody, and I'd get off with my golf clubs with two other friends, and we'd play golf for the day and then catch the bus back.
Fantastic. You mentioned growing up on Northside Drive. Tell me a little bit about the house and the history of the house.
Well, it may be helpful to our audience if I talk a little bit about my grandmother, Louise Allen. Louise Allen was a Richardson, and the Richardson family home, which is commonly known Broadlands, is also on Northside Drive. It may have at one time had an entrance off of West Paces Ferry, but in my lifetime it's always been on Northside Drive. It's an old stately home, about 100-year-old home that my grandmother grew up in. And in the late 40s, early 50s, her parents bequeathed a piece of property to her and her husband at the time, my grandfather, and they built their home and subsequently gave land to my parents, my aunt and uncle, and other Allen members to build homes adjacent to each other. So we had a little family compound that we grew up on.
And the Richardson home, where your grandmother grew up, is it still existing? And can you describe the architecture of it?
I've only been in it one time. And the current owners are Carl Allen, who I believe is deceased, and Elizabeth Allen, his widow. And I remember in my grandmother Louise Allen's lifetime, she was just thrilled that the Allens, Carl and Elizabeth, had bought her childhood home because they had a real commitment to preserving it and protecting it. And they asked her advice on what it was like when she was a child. And I don't know if any of y'all have ever been in the home, but there's a ballroom that would rival the Piedmont Driving Club ballroom.
So you went at one time. Do you recall, describe the house in general so folks can get an idea of just what it might look like, visualize as you describe it. Is it the White House up on the hill?
It is a White House up on a hill. It's oriented so that it looks back away from Northside Drive. It looks down off of a hill onto Wolf Creek and kind of overlooks the Top Hat soccer fields. It's up on a huge perch, and at one point there were stables and horses there, and it was all farmland 100 years ago.
Did your grandfather, your grandmom growing up in that area, did she have any tales from being a child with Wolf Creek and the neighborhood and the stables, or any horseback riding? Or
I don't recall her being effusive with childhood stories, so I don't remember much from her childhood.
Okay. Were there any histories, because I know there was a gentleman's riding club, I believe, called the Saddle and Sirloin in Buckhead. And was there any participation from the Allens with that?
Not,
that you know we're
not
aware
that I
of?
recall, Chad. I just don't remember.
Gotcha. You mentioned a lot of the family members ending up with pieces of property in and around that. Were y'all a pretty tight-knit family, even with cousins, aunts, uncles, and describe how y'all would get together or use the property?
We were. The epicenter was obviously my grandparents' home, the matriarch and patriarch. That was the center of attention for Christmas celebrations, for family get-togethers. But we all shared the property. And it would not be uncommon for me to be outside playing as a young child and to bump into my grandfather, who was hitting golf balls at the time.
Fantastic. Do you remember the architect by chance who your grandmother hired to build their house, their matrimonial home?
I just know that it has kind of a South African stucco flair to it. I don't know the architect.
Okay. And did you grow up in that house?
I grew up in a house that my parents built next door. It's a shared driveway. So you'd come down the driveway, you would turn left to my grandparents' house, you would turn right to our house.
Where did you go to school in Buckhead?
I started as a young boy at Tuxedo Elementary School on Northside Drive, and I guess graduated elementary school and then enrolled at Warren T. Jackson, which was a public school on Mount Perrin. I was comfortable in public school. My parents were completely comfortable with me in public school. But if you think back to early 70s, integration was prevalent in Atlanta. And school busing was the topic du jour. And my parents were completely comfortable with integrating the public school system, but at the end of the day, they weren't comfortable with the possibility of me having to get on a bus and being matriculated to the other side of town. So in 7th grade, I enrolled in private school.
How was that transition?
I met my lifelong friends in 7th grade. It was an easy transition to Westminster.
Tell us a little bit about your family as well. So you grew up in Buckhead. Did you stay in Atlanta? You're in Buckhead your whole life? Have you ventured elsewhere?
No, all of my family's roots are deep and wide in Atlanta, and we've all either gone to school here or returned here after school. You could throw a net over a lot of my relatives pretty easily in the 30305 area code.
Your childhood in Buckhead, aside from schooling and Sears Roebuck, were there any other memories of favorite restaurants, favorite events, anything that was particular to Buckhead that still sort of a fond?
Well, for those that remember, Josh Powell had his boys' summer camp located in Buckhead probably for 20 years, and it was located at Haverty Hollow, which I guess is the backside of Kingswood. Does that sound right? Across from Pace Academy, if you worked your way down back to Wolf Creek, he used the Haverty barn and had a little football program and a summer program down there, and it was right across the creek from us. So as a young child, I remember looking across the creek with envy and saying, I want to go to Josh Powell someday.
I think the original Josh Powell got its start, I think, across on Arden Road in West Wesley, if I remember correctly, historically, and then it moved to the Haverty Hollow. And I think for our generation, there were lots of good memories there. Tell us a little bit about your grandfather as well. Obviously, you mentioned your family has been multi-generational in Atlanta, hasn't strayed too far. Tell us in particular about your grandfather and his importance for the city of Atlanta.
I don't know if he grew up in my great-grandfather's home at 2600 Peachtree or not. I'm not exactly sure where he lived in his early childhood. But he went to Georgia Tech, class of 1933. I believe he was an SAE at Georgia Tech. He has or had deep roots with Georgia Tech. Then he went to work for the family business, which was downtown, and then pursued a political career after that.
And what did that political career lead to? What positions did he hold in the area?
I guess he would be best known for being a two-term mayor in Atlanta during the 60s, which was a pretty turbulent time in our city's history.
Do you recall any family conversations or dinner conversation with stories that would be of interest with his mayorship?
We had a telephone that was attached to the wall that had a long cord, this was pre-cell phone, of course, and in our family, as a young child, you were not allowed to answer the telephone. The adults had to answer the phone. And I do remember a very kind of gripping situation from my young childhood where I answered the phone, and the person on the other end of the phone was obviously disappointed with my grandfather's stance on the race relationship. And he shared some threatening remarks with me and then hung up the phone. And I remember, of course, reporting this to my parents. And the next thing I knew, there was a police car in our driveway for the next couple of weeks, which I later learned was paid for by my grandparents.
And he was a two-term mayor, so obviously it sounds like he was mayor during your childhood as well, or at least your early childhood.
I believe I was born during his first term, and my birth was actually announced. It was announced on the radio that Mayor Allen had his firstborn grandson. That was my introduction to the world.
That's a good introduction. You mentioned your grandmother as well in their history. I want to ask sort of both branches of your grandmom and your grandfather. Let's start with your grandmom's side. Tell us the history of her side of the family in Atlanta. Obviously, it sounds like they had been here for a while as well. So Louise Allen's Richardson's.
Louise Allen Richardson has a strong connection with the History Center, which has been kind enough to host us today for this interview. So I'll reflect back on her for a minute. She was born a Richardson. As I mentioned, she grew up in the Broadlands home on Northside Drive. But if I'm not mistaken, her parents, her mother, Josephine Richardson, was an Inman. And the Inmans, Josephine Inman had a brother, and I don't recall his name, but he went on to later build and found the Swan House. And she had a sister who married a Grant, who went on to live and found the Cherokee Town Club. So in my grandmother's family tree, you've got descendants that lived in the Swan House in what is now the Cherokee Town Club and what is now the Broadlands home on Northside Drive.
And she was pretty involved philanthropically as well to botanical gardens.
I don't know her history per se with the botanical gardens as much as I do with the History Center and some other organizations.
And the History Center being the donation of the Swan House or the acquisition of the Swan House, and any other involvement of laying its roots?
Well, I can just speak to my childhood memories as it relates to coming over here with my grandmother. I guess McLareth Hall, which is where we are today, is the original Atlanta Historical Society building.
I believe there was one on Peachtree earlier, but I don't.
My earliest memories involve coming over here as a young boy. I was maybe not even 10. And there was a wonderful garden out back. I think it's now the Goizetta Gardens. And it had all of these mountain laurels and rhododendrons that needed attention and watering. And I never thought of her as anything more than just a gardener. She would ask me to help her hook up watering hoses, and she would hook up 3 and 4 watering hoses and have me lug those out into the garden so that she could water the native plants that were here. And hopefully some of them have still survived.
I would imagine so. And your grandfather's side, so the Allen side, you had mentioned had his original house on Peachtree. We're on Peachtree. You mentioned the address, but where approximately was that?
2600 Peachtree is now some townhomes, but it's between Lindbergh and Jesus Junction,
Okay.
just down from Park Place, on the same side of the street as Park Place. It was a home, I guess, that would have been considered consistent with the Randolph Lucas house.
And so he grew up there and then moved to the Richardson house when he married Louise. Is that?
No, this would have been my grandfather, Ivan Allen Sr., who lived his entire life in a home on 2600. I did have the privilege of going into my great-grandfather's home at one time, and the only thing I remember about it was it had water radiators. I guess this was before central heating and air.
Do you recall if they built the house?
I don't know if he built the house or not, Chad. It's not there anymore. I know that.
And did he start the Ivan Allen Company? So your great-grandfather.
He did. He started the Ivan Allen Company, which was a office supply company throughout the 1900s. He started it in the late 1890s. He came down from Dalton, Georgia. And what I find interesting about his career was he began selling typewriters out of the back of his car, the old-timey typewriters that you'd push the button and the I guess the letter would come up and hit the ribbon and make an impression. But what was revolutionary at the time was he was selling on credit, and nobody was selling on credit at that time, and that was somewhat revolutionary.
And primarily started with Atlanta and grew to serve the Southeast, or was it still primarily Georgia?
The 5 southeastern states were Georgia, North and South Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama. But it was a regional operation, Southeast only.
And it stayed within the family. So your great-grandfather started it. Your grandfather worked there prior to his political aspiration. And who else in the family?
My father, Ivan Allen III, led the company for probably 20 years. And my uncle Inman Allen served as president for a term, and as well as my cousin Louise Allen served as president for a term.
And did you ever work there?
I started in the family business in 1987, sweeping floors in the warehouse.
And tell us a little bit about the history of the company. Ultimately, it being a regional company was a target for a national, and what happened to the company?
Well, I love talking about the history of the company more so than the current environment. I've got copies of really old Ivan Allen Company catalogs from the 50s. And if you think about what was going on at that time, fire safety was not really prominent in the Southeast, so everybody had to maintain their critical business records in a safe. So we sold an awful lot of safes. We sold an awful lot of spittoons, which is surprising to me. But in 1999, the family made a decision to sell the company to Staples, which was a national and international operation out of Boston, Massachusetts.
Where were the company headquarters?
We were located initially on Ivy Street, which is now Peachtree Center Avenue, 221 Peachtree Center Avenue. It later became a very prominent parking deck in downtown Atlanta.
And I imagine delivery of the office supplies primarily to downtown, starting and servicing
The
businesses.
niche that Ivan Allen Company served was the Southeast market, and in Atlanta in particular, we offered twice a day delivery, which is hard to believe. You could get something delivered the same day. And at the time, that set us apart from everybody else.
And a very distinct logo, if I recall, growing up as well. Tell us, so going back to you, we've established sort of the family history, and let's know a little bit more about Ivan Allen IV. After you left private school here in Atlanta, where'd you go to college?
I went off to Pennsylvania to Bucknell University. The reason I did that was I knew I'd come back to Atlanta and start my career here and wanted to experience a different part of the world. I went to school primarily with young men and women from New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania.
And returned to Atlanta. Are you married? Any children?
I do. I have 2 boys, 2 biological children. Ivan V, who's 27, a younger son named William, and 2 stepdaughters, Jordan and Taylor Upchurch.
And do y'all still live in the family property, family?
No. The home that I grew up in later transferred ownership to my sister, Amanda, and she lived there for 10 or 15 years. And bless her heart, she came to a family meeting one day and said, "It's been idyllic raising my kids here. I can turn them loose. It's just enchanted living in this part of Atlanta that's so nestled and protected back in the woods. But the only 2 people I see are the garbage man and the mailman, and I need more social interaction." So she moved to a more, I guess, more popular neighborhood, or a neighborhood that had more
populous, yeah, a little bit more of a neighborhood feel. Was there some intense lobbying or competition to see who might stay within the family bounds?
There's always been a family member who wanted to be there, and I spent my childhood there, and that was long enough. And I settled down in Atlanta, but not near the rest of my family.
So your dedication to Buckhead has been, in 2011, you joined Buckhead Heritage. And tell us about your involvement. What drew you to Buckhead Heritage, your involvement with it, and some of your pet projects that you've championed?
Well, I have a natural connection to the Atlanta History Center, so I'd like to delineate just a little bit about what I feel is different about Buckhead Heritage and the Atlanta History Center. In 2006, when we were founded, our founder, Wright Mitchell, was out on a run, and he got up to the corner of Chatham and West Paces Ferry and looked over and found this unattended, overgrown cemetery, which he later uncovered and found that it was just littered with graves, and is now Harmony Grove Cemetery. It's one of the first cemeteries Buckhead Heritage has taken over stewardship for. And we don't have a physical presence. We're not a museum like the History Center. We're more of a grassroots organization with like-minded individuals like myself that are just trying to preserve and protect Buckhead's historical resources, which could be oral history like we're doing today. It could be an institution like Rich's Department Store, or it could be a place, or it could be a lot of different things. But I've enjoyed being involved with Buckhead Heritage for over 10 years now.
I think one of the most important projects that you probably would be humble to admit to would be the work with the cemetery at New Hope Church. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of New Hope and what drew you to that project and what all you got done over there through Buckhead Heritage and members of the church and other groups?
So the history of New Hope Church is an African American church located on Arden Road, right in the center of Buckhead. So I was compelled to learn a little bit more about how did this church originate. And in the 1860s or 1870s, a prominent white farmer, James Whispering Smith, bequeathed 2 acres of property in his will to colored persons. And his intention was for them to build a church and a school. And you may think, why would he have done that? And my understanding is that the African American population at that time were hosting church revivals on the site. So it was a natural place for them to build a church. And they began burying their membership across the street in the cemetery. It's about a 2-acre cemetery. And I got involved in 2007, where we raised some money. We did a archaeological survey of the cemetery. And go ahead.
Describe what the cemetery looked like in 2007.
Well, it was completely overgrown, much like Harmony Grove was when Wright found it. It was almost impenetrable with weeds and jungle. And along with Peachtree Road United Methodist Church, who's been a wonderful key stakeholder in the project, volunteers came together, they cleared the property. Peachtree Road has donated tens of thousands of dollars to get old trees, dead trees removed from the property. But once it was in sort of a navigable shape, Buckhead Heritage hired a architectural surveying company to come in. The guy does ground penetrating survey. He surveys all the identifiable graves and tombstones that are there. But what really piqued my interest, Chad, was he found over 100 unmarked graves. And that, in my mind, was worthy of continued exploration. So we went back to, I guess, the Habersham Park neighborhood and asked them if they would be interested in raising money for future exploration. They lifted up considerable amount of resources that allowed Buckhead Heritage to fund a fence that delineates the property of the cemetery. And that's important because the property lines were not clearly demarcated. And it was important to, I guess, the church and to the membership and the congregation to know exactly the boundaries of their cemetery. The other thing that we did with the funds was we thought that the congregation would be interested in memorializing with some tombstones or some headstones the unmarked graves. But when we approached them about putting just a simple piece of marble in front of the unmarked graves, they chose not to. And we have to respect their wishes because it's their congregation, it's their descendants, but they felt it wasn't historically accurate to have a piece of marble that would not have been representational of the time of when those descendants were buried there. So they did allow us to place some rebar in the ground so we can go back at any time and identify and locate where those unmarked graves are. But the other thing that Buckhead Heritage has done a great job of is engaging Ashley Shares. Ashley Shares is Director of Preservation at Oakland Cemetery. We contract with her with the funds that we raised from the neighborhood for Ashley to come back and restore a lot of these tombstones and gravestones that have been broken and crumbled over the years. And if you take the time to go into New Hope, you'll see that not only have the tombstones been repaired, but we've also cleaned and really made it presentable again. It's really an asset to the neighborhood now.
And I think it is probably one of the most interesting historical record of Buckhead and the times. And I know that Buckhead Heritage has interviewed a number of folks at New Hope as well, Moses Few, who is an elder, as well as some neighbors who grew up, and it grew up around there. And the interaction of the neighbors within the church has been pretty something special. And it's been great to see that continuance 100 and some odd years later of the neighbors still working with the congregation and it being such a vital historical link for Buckhead and the community.
My hat's off to the Habersham Park Civic Association. Buckhead Heritage stuffed mailboxes for a couple of 3 days, and that neighborhood really lifted up their support of New Hope Cemetery with over $35,000 of contributions, some as small as $25. So there's a real interest in the neighborhood to preserving the legacy of New Hope, and Buckhead Heritage was happy to step in and be the conduit for that.
Well, I think it's in hopefully a position to stay present and in great condition for a long time, thanks to your
A little anecdotal story about what might be happening at New Hope Cemetery going forward is the Magnolia Garden Club, which is just adjacent to New Hope Cemetery, was interested in doing some volunteer work. I explained to them that, as Judith and others know, it's arduous. It's raking leaves, it's pulling weeds, it's backbreaking work. And the concept that we've come up with that might have some interest for the congregation is there are plants that are historically significant in African American cemeteries, one of which is ivy, another of which is the yucca plant. And we've approached the congregation about allowing the Magnolia Garden Club to raise money and maybe refresh the cemetery with some additional yucca plants.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Your current term at Buckhead Heritage, you just became president. What do you see and hope for the organization during your tenure of leadership? Are there any pet peeve projects or initiatives or expansion of ideas?
I'll talk about some headwinds that are in our sails that were created by the previous administration. Charlotte Margolin, Faye Pierce have done a great job of energizing our membership with our monthly programming. As you may or may not know, we host a speaker series at St. Philip's Church the third Thursday of every month. We try to have a speaker on something that's topical to Buckhead, and the attendance has grown to 125 members and guests for these lectures on Thursday nights. So we really hope to continue that momentum that Faye and Charlotte created last year throughout the year. One of my audacious goals for Buckhead Heritage, and this is just my personal goals, so I don't know if the executive committee agrees with this, but wouldn't it be exciting if financially Buckhead Heritage could find some way to move their little one-person office that's in Matheson, off of Matheson Road in the heart of Buckhead, into the lodge, which is right across the street from the E River School. It's a historically significant building. It's got some really restrictive covenants and restrictions that's going to maybe prevent a developer from going in there and doing something contemporary to the space. So I just have this vision of Buckhead Heritage housing our one-person office in the lodge at some point in the future.
And I probably need some fact checking on this, but I do know it's owned by the Atlanta Public School System. I think it was the original sales office for the developer who developed the Peachtree Battle and the neighborhoods back in there, Peachtree Heights and that area.
The other things that we have a lot of wind behind our sails is what we're doing today, the Oral History Project. We've got a litany of individuals, Buckhead residents, Buckhead natives that have wonderful stories that we want to capture, and we want to catalog and make available to our membership and to the public in the exact same setting we're doing today.
Well, here's one more chance for you to reflect on Buckhead and your times growing up. How have you seen Buckhead change, and any places that have been lost? You mentioned Sears, which has been lost. Any other places that maybe have changed or sustained that you want to reflect upon?
Well, as a young adult, of course, I remember the Buckhead Village quite well. That was the epicenter of our nightlife as young adults, and that has changed dramatically in my lifetime. I enjoy the restaurants in the Buckhead Village. I enjoy all the improvement and development that has come in, but it does have a different feel from when we were younger.
You know, you may be one of, as we work through our oral history list, you may be one of our younger ones we've interviewed to date that maybe enjoyed the Buckhead Village at that level than others. So you may be the first inaugural
Some first-hand knowledge.
Reflective, comments on that area. Is there any particular establishment that you went to more often than others, and describe a little bit of that? Animal crackers, maybe?
No, I just remember Buckhead Heritage hosted a trivia night, and we got together in teams of 5 or 6, and Thornton Kennedy, our vice president, grilled us with questions, and one of the initial ask of the audience was develop your team name, and our group came up with the 5 Pacers.
A reference to the bar there across from Irby's, indeed. Do you remember Good Old Days? Was that a haunt at all?
Was that the corner of Far Road and Peachtree? Or no, it was part of the Buckhead Village, wasn't it?
It was part of the village. It may have been the corner of Far and Peachtree on the northeastern side, but I could be wrong on that.
Getting away from the nightlife angle,
Yeah.
I do remember what a coming of age it was as a young boy to go up to the Buckhead Men's Store on Peachtree Road and East Paces Ferry and get your first blue blazer, and that was a rite of passage. You could maybe parlay that into a trip to Everett Roach Sporting Goods store. There were some institutions that I remember at that corner.
Well, I'm going to open up some questioning to the other folks in attendance here. If there's anything that I might have missed, or that you have thoughts of wanting to take advantage of our time with Ivan to ask those now.
I read that your grandfather and grandmother were friends with the Kings, Martin Luther King and his family. Is there anything that was told to you about his assassination or his tenure?
Well, Judith, they did have a friendship, and the story that I think is really insightful about my grandparents' marriage and their connection was the night that Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis. My grandfather knew to go to Coretta Scott King. He knew to be of service to her personally and as a steward of the city. But when he decided to go to her that night, my grandmother said, "I'm going with you." And she said that because she, as a woman, felt that she could relate to a woman that was grieving more so than perhaps her husband could. And I just think that's such insight that I never would have thought about.
I think he and your grandmother, they both embody the city that doesn't hate. And growing up in Atlanta myself, I always felt that, while we were distinct communities, that there was a cooperation. And I read that about your grandparents, that they were there and with them before they even knew that Martin Luther King had been passed. Like they were there as soon as he was shot. But that just is a neat coming together.
Two stories that I'd like to share in regards to that is, in my lifetime, I cannot tell you the number of not Atlanta natives, but individuals that have moved into our city that might have been in their 70s or 80s who said to me, "Your grandmother, Louise Allen, came to my home less than a month after I'd moved to Atlanta and said, here are the list of institutions that you will get involved in." And it was the Atlanta Historical Society, it was Westminster Schools, it was the Speech Center, it was Junior League, and you have a choice, but you will get involved in one of these. And then the other story I like to tell, that my grandparents were both very adamant about as it relates to the 60s and all of the racial unrest was that it wasn't just one person doing the heavy lifting. It was a combination of the black power structure, the black educational leadership over at Morehouse. They were all meeting behind closed doors with the business community, and they did this as a team. And I don't want that part of the story to ever be forgotten.
I think that is a good point, and I do want to go back to the story when you answered the phone. You had mentioned that your grandfather may have had some views that some folks in Atlanta may not have held. Could you elaborate on those just to kind of clarify what those views might have been?
Well, in the 60s, in Atlanta and the South in particular, were struggling with integration. How does a city integrate their public accommodations? How do they integrate their schools, their swimming pools? How is this going to work out? There was federal legislation that said it was going to happen, but the South was slow to enact that. And he took controversial stands. For instance, when he went into the mayor's office that said, we are going to remove signs that said this is a colored water fountain or a colored restroom. We are going to integrate City Hall, and that push went on to more public accommodations in the city, and his white friends did not like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, leadership for seeing where the direction needed to be, for certain. Are there any other?
Trying to think of one. Actually, what's your favorite memory of, what do you want to pass on to your children about Buckhead?
What I would want to say to my kids about Buckhead is that this initiative at one time to make Buckhead a separate city, in my estimation, was not representative of the fundamentals that our little city was founded on. We were, in my memory and childhood, we were an inclusive, welcoming community, and I hope that we will continue to be part of the city of Atlanta throughout my lifetime and throughout theirs. And I hope that they'll support that as well.
That brings back another point that Buckhead Heritage has worked on, was Frankie Allen Park, which I think when you grew up and I grew up, being a man in my 50s, was Bagley Park. And Buckhead Heritage recently had an initiative to rename that. Can you tell a little bit about the history of Bagley Park and that renaming?
Sure. So we have a wonderful board member, long-serving board member, Alon Olsby. And Alon is a descendant of Mr. Bagley. Mr. Bagley was a resident of the Macedonia community. It was an African-American community, which is where current Frankie Allen Bagley Park is. And it was a thriving African-American community that the city took through eminent domain and displaced all of the residents. So the name Bagley Park has historical significance, and Alon and others felt that it was appropriate that the park be named Bagley Park. Notwithstanding, Frankie Allen was a long-standing, loved and revered umpire of the Buckhead baseball community. But I think we've reached a wonderful compromise where we've got Bagley Park with Frankie Allen Field now.
Did you ever play Buckhead baseball growing up?
I was an NYO guy, so I didn't make it to Buckhead baseball.
Gotcha. Well, Ivan, this has been a pleasure and a privilege to sit down and hear the history of your family and the legacy that it held, and as well as you and your championing cause of the love for Buckhead and your involvement in the community and your continued leadership. So we thank you for that. And
Anything else that we haven't covered that feels important to you?
I just want to thank the Atlanta History Center for their partnership with Buckhead Heritage.
well, thank you, Evan.
Okay, well, I actually have a question. And it's gonna be a strange one. Did you guys have any pets? Did you have any pets?
I did. Oh my goodness! I grew up with German shepherds. My grandparents had chows. I have terrible memories of their chows chasing me around the house.
Do you remember their names?
Penny and I remember Penny. They had an affection for these Chinese chows, and they were mean as snakes.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming in.